Okay, so today we are painting Varag Ghoul-Chewer for Blood Bowl. So before I lay any paint down, first thing I've done is a spray black undercoat, making sure that none of the coloured plastic is showing through. Then after that we've done a leadbelcher spray, not complete coverage, 45-degree angle-ish from the top, trying to leave some black areas showing from underneath and in the gaps and cracks, and that helps with the shading and highlighting and tones of your model later on. So first colour we're doing is just a pale brown. This is Vallejo paint, Flames War branded from when I did a Flames War army. And this is just for all the cloth on the model. So it's trousers, the gloves, not the straps. And what I've also done is go over the horns and the teeth on the model. And there are a lot of spiky horns and teeth on the model. And because that'll give you a better three-tone effect later on those areas. So the first question is, why have I done the base coat of leadbelcher when I could have just left it black or started from there? I find, one, stops you having to dry brush loads of metal on later, so it's a huge time saver. There's a lot of metal on this model, as there are on a lot of workshop models, so it does save you that bit of time. Other one is the vibrancy of the paint you're putting on top. So when you're putting on a lot of lighter colours, your flesh tones, your leathers, your bones, on top of black, you either have to do 3 or 4 layers or just accept the fact that the paint is not going to be the sort of colour it's going to represent. So a lot of people might start undercoating white, for example, or like an off pale colour, and then painting the silver on. I find actually that leadbelcher or some sort of metallic undercoat is the best of both worlds. It gives you enough darkness for your dark areas, but it gives you enough ability to put sort of vibrant colours over the top and still get the tone showing. So I just find it's a good contrast. So while I've been waffling, we've done the leather on the model, and we've done that just with a light brown, again, Vallejo paint. And we've got all the straps, and there are a hell of a lot of straps. So you've got the skull strapped to his head, his armour strapped on, the corpse is strapped onto his the shoulder horn, so quite a lot of leathering to go there. And again, as I said before, the advantage of a wet palette is that if you miss something, you can go back and go around it later. And if you see, I think on his right leg, I've missed some of the stitching down his trousers, which I obviously pick up at a later point and realise I've missed it. So, another advantage to doing sessions of painting is that you've still got these paints available to do later. If you do paint on one Saturday and then come back a week later, you're going to have to dig some more of your paint back out, which is a bit of a pain. So always advise wet palettes, and if you're ever going to paint, try and give yourself an hour or so to do a decent chunk of painting so that you can make yourself more efficient. So that's all the flesh done. We're looking at there's not a huge amount of flesh showing here. You do have to sometimes dig out a little bit of a brush, because you've got some areas small brush, because there's some areas in between the armour panels that you've got to get, and obviously his fingers and things. So there is a fair bit there, but it's just quite hidden in places. Now we're working on the next layer of the bone. So we've used just a Vallejo bleach bone. Now with the horns, you can do these any way you like, and just slap over across and cover the entire thing. But what I find works really well, especially with the ends of the bone and ends of any horns and things, is work with the grain of the horn. Drag it from the bottom to the end, and what that'll do is deposit a little bit more paint at the end of the bone, just to brighten up that colour. And don't paint right to the edge of the metal when you're doing all the bones and teeth around it, because if you leave a little bit at the end showing of the brown you've already put on, it just gives a better toned effect. So we're now just using flat flesh, and we're looking at doing the corpse. We're going to do some extra stages on the corpse later. This is such an integral part of this model, and literally that is what your eye gets drawn to, that we need to spend a little bit more time on this later. But for the moment, we're just looking at a base layer, slapping the flesh on and getting it covered. And at this stage, again, don't worry if you catch some of the bone with the flesh, that will be covered later. What we're looking at now is just trying to stay neatly within the lines wherever possible. Okay, so now we're doing just a black from Citadel, and we're painting the shoes of the model and one of his weirdest elements, which is the top knot that's on his head. I have seen a lot of negative press about this model knocking around on social media, and I do see where some of it's coming from. I suppose when I looked at it, look, it's a great model. I think it looks fantastic in a lot of ways, but there are some strange decisions on the model, given that it's a Blood Bowl figure. And one of them that I just disagree in general with is we've got a top knot that's attached to a skull. So all the flesh is rotted off, but he's still got a nice little top knot. It's a little bit strange. But hey, look, it looks great. Sometimes you're just not worried. This is a fantasy game after all, but it would be easy to remove that. Now I've left it on because I wanted to just do the pure models as they are. Because again, I've worked with the Blood Bowl teams for about 15 years, so let's do as they say. So now to the armour, and I've had another Games Workshop pot disaster. I'm not trying to diss GW in my videos, it just seems to happen that my Games Workshop paints keep exploding on me while I'm using them. Another advantage of a painting handle actually is one of these things. If you have that kind of paint disaster and you're holding the model itself, you're going to have to go wash your hands and be really, really careful you don't get any paint on your model. The beauty of a paint handle of some description, this is a workshop one, is that you don't have that worry if you're never touching the model. So this stage with the Armour, what we're doing now is stippling. So you see this is an older brush. I've just cut the end off so it's got like a flat head to it. You don't want to overload the brush when you're using this technique. You put too much on, you may as well just paint it on. So you're looking at getting a balance between speed and lack of paint, if that makes sense. And when you're doing it, you want to stab it on the model, taking care to leave areas where you're leaving the silver showing around the cracks and gaps and the battered areas. So it can make a nice effect as you build up the layers. So you'll see now I've done the red on his jaw area, and again I've just stippled that paint on just to keep the same effect as the armour. I want to do something different, mark him out as a character, so we've done that. And then I've very quickly done the grey on the base and a brown on the mud areas that we've left showing through. Model's dry by now, so we left it sort of 10 minutes just to dry off before we do a wash stage, and we're using a Vallejo sepia wash. I always decant it onto either a plate or on here the top of the wet palette lid, because I've had disasters before where I've knocked one of these on the floor. You don't want that, so stir it with your brush, decant it onto there, and then I'm using a nice fat flat workshop dry brush, and you just slather in the model with this wash. Once you've done a decent amount, make sure it's not pooling up, and you can use the brush just to wick off any areas where you think it's pooling too much, because you don't want to drown all the detail. So I've covered the entire model. This was left overnight to dry. I did the next painting session the following day. And now what we're looking at doing is going back and refreshing all the colours we've just used. So I won't talk you through them all, but obviously I'd on a wet palette, so most of the colours were actually absolutely fine the next day. They get slightly watery overnight on a wet palette, but that's great for this stage actually, because a little bit watery means you can actually get the effect quite nicely. It will show up very bright to start with because your paint's slightly watered down, but they do dry, back to the colour that it was initially. So I had to refresh the light brown on here actually from memory, because it just separated too much, but the rest of the colours are absolutely fine. Another beauty of a wet palette. So what you're doing now is going around and looking at the raised areas. So on all these colours, we're not doing a complete total coverage again. What we're doing is taking the natural folds of the model and the raised patches where the light would hit, and we're using the colours on those raised areas to give what would be a three-tone effect. So when you look at what we've got now is, you've got the slightly brighter colour, obviously it's not dry yet, so it looks even brighter than it would do. You've got the lighter colour on the very top raised folded areas of the model. Then you've got the mid-tone where the wash will have settled 50-50, and then at the base of that wash you've got where the wash is settled into the cracks. So you do end up with a three-tone effect right across it. So we've gone over all the models with the colours we've previously used, and now you could finish at this stage. The model's absolutely fine. Actually, you would get away with this. It would be a great effect on the tabletop. But what we're going to do is just take everything to the next level. So we're going to do a bit of work with the silver. We're using a lighter blue there and a very light, very bright green onto the palette, just to pick up and lift the armour, which is a major part of the model, and the skin, and doing some little bits extra there. So the red section. So literally we're taking some slightly brighter versions of previous colours and just picking areas that I think are going to have the most impact on the model. Now you could go around and do an extra highlighting layer on every single part of this model. You would extend the painting time. You'd go from a couple of hours to probably 3, 4, 5 hours, but I want to keep it sort of standard sort of timing to a couple of hours for a major character. It's kind of how I work. So we're doing the stippling on the armour now. So we've taken a 50-50 mix of your brighter blue and your standard colour that you had on there, and we are stippling really in the centre of those armour panels. What we don't want to do is we don't want to cover the entire model, because again we're now adding what would be a fourth tone in here. We don't want to start covering up the damaged areas. What we're going to do is just give a little bit more interest and a little bit more lift to what is a crucial larger part of the model. So as I said before, you could go crazy. You could do this on every single colour, and look, that is how you would get that Golden Demon standard, where you would never get Golden Demon standard from 2 or 3 hours. You'd be there for hour upon hour, but a little bit of a lift is all we're going for. So now the same with the flesh. So we're looking at a 50-50 mix from the dark green that we used and the sort of very bright, vivid scorpion green. And we're just going to pick out those raised areas. Now don't be afraid to play. There is nothing wrong here with you know, whacking a bit more of the brighter green in, putting a bit more dark green in, having an experiment to see what you get exactly right. And again, it doesn't have to be consistent across your entire team. So if you're doing this technique across a whole Blood Bowl team to match, it does not matter if one orc has got a slightly different skin tone to another. You know, as long as you're following fairly consistent patterns, your teams will look absolutely fine. So these are just picking out some of the raised edges and highlights. And yeah, just having a play really what took my fancy, thinking what needs to be done. So there wasn't any massive method of I will, you know, pick out every single fingernail, or I will pick out every eyebrow or whatever. It was just grabbing the raised areas. And it's quite a nice model for ease of edge highlighting, if that makes sense, because it's quite a spiky model. You know, there's quite a lot of armour panels, there's quite a lot of obvious areas to highlight, so if you're going to teach yourself how to do it, this is one of those models that works quite well for it. So now going around with a bit of the silver colour, just to go into the centre of any damaged armour areas. So again, we're not looking at covering all of those ink areas. What we're doing is just picking out anything sensible. So you can see there I've just kind of gone, oh, I'll whack a bit on a buckle, I'll put a little bit on that bit of damaged armour, but I don't put it on every bit of damaged armour. We're just looking at adding a little bit more variance, a little bit more texture. So, you know, you can go as crazy on this as you want, or you can not do it at all. I just went around and literally picked out what took my fancy. Not a lot of paint on the brush, not putting a lot of paint down on the model. It just adds, again, a further tone. Now we're going to do something a bit different, be interesting. We're taking a glaze medium, which, look, you can use water, it doesn't work quite as well. What this stuff does is it basically separates out the paint, makes it flow slightly further, and it's kind of like you're making your own ink for it. So you could just pick up a green ink. And what we're now doing is trying to add a little bit more depth and detail to that corpse. So we're taking the green we've already mixed and just dropping this on some of the flat areas and into some of the gaps, because I want to make it look like a slightly rotten, mouldy corpse, which I think has worked quite well there. And I've done a similar effect with some red in there, so around where the flesh is coming in and stuck onto the horn and everything, so a little bit of red in there onto the flesh. So that's a complete model. A lot of detail on the corpse there. I think it's a standout part, and I think that's a quick easy paint scheme for Varag Ghoul-Chewer, and I hope you enjoyed it.